Hello everybody, my name's Amanda Cooper and we thought that we would do a little film today of a painting from our garden in West Oxfordshire. It's still pretty chilly, as you can see from how many clothes I've got on, and I'm going to try and do this painting within about quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and hopefully I'll be able to get it done in that time. There's nothing like being in situ or en plein air, as they say in the painting world. So I thought I would choose a very simple subject, which is of this little old gate here, which has been here ever since we've been here, and I have embellished it a little bit, as you can see, by putting a little red watering can in the front, and that's always a little bit of a trick, a compositional trick I would call it. And so what I've done is I've made a very small sketch on my little pad here as quickly as I could, just to get my eye in. And if ever you can't think of anything to draw, just scribble. Just take a pad and just draw whatever comes into your head. Doesn't matter what you do really, because all you're doing is you're warming up the brain, and it acts as a catalyst to do that. And another thing I find helps me very much is to use a little viewfinder like this, which I cut in an old postcard, 3 centimetres by 2, that possibly could be 5 centimetres actually, just to make yourself a little hole through which you can sort of line up your picture, a bit like you would on your phone, but it's quite nice to do it with just this little tool. Works quite well. So I've got the water here all prepared, and I have got a couple of quite big brushes, a 16 and a 12, I think, by the look of it, and I've got a simple palette with just a few colours. I've got raw sienna, raw umber, gold green, some aureolin yellow and a touch of cadmium, hooker's green, and my favourite ultramarine and burnt sienna. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very, very quickly put some sort of bright green wash, sounds a bit weird, in the background. We've got these lovely willows hanging down over the stream here, and I'm going to wet the page quite radically, because when you're standing up outside there's nothing for it but to actually paint quite quickly. So here we are. I'm just going to, instead of labouring over some rather painful willow attempts, I am going to just really make it drippy and let this golden green, which is fundamentally a yellow, come on down here, using a bit of a swoop just to get the wind in the willows. And if you'll excuse the pun, quite often I use a basic ultramarine wash, French ultramarine, which is the blue, just to get my little tones in. So if I wanted to just block something out, like the hedge here, I'm just going to, so that I can see the tree in front, which I've used as a little bit of a foil, the tree. I've used this as a sort of a frame. And don't worry about doing any straight lines. The more wobbly the better. And I'm going to go straight over that gate so that you can actually see what we're doing here. If I don't finish this in time, I'll finish it and send you a still that will go at the end of the film, just to show you the finished product. But we should... The problem with watercolour, of course, is that it doesn't dry very quickly, and sometimes I just won't be able to finish absolutely fine detail. Not that we want a lot of fine detail on a day like today, just want to block some of it in. I've let the drips go, I don't mind them as long as they behave themselves. I keep my eye on them a little bit. So as you can see, I'm just letting my brush go very loosely around the page, quite light, keeping it all quite light. And here we are. There's usually a dark side and a light side of the tree. This is a very light tree on one side, and then it becomes darker up here, which I'll do later because this is all going to run. Just going to add a bit more of the blue just into the swoopy willow bit at the back, just to get a bit of action in here. And then behind the gate, difficult to tell what that actually is because it's all very sort of spring-like at the moment, but you don't want to labour with a garden painting too much detail. You've got to choose what's important, and I'm going to do a sort of a very bright green moment sort of through the gate, so that it looks as if we're going through into a sort of secret garden, really. And then hopefully that can just blend in with the background slightly there. And I might even, I've got some greenery here as well, but I'll just let that go. And the lawn is a bit green in front as well, but you've got to be very, very careful of that. I try quite hard to avoid green, believe it or not. It'll probably end up as a green painting. But what I'm saying is that you can be a little bit crafty and not have it everywhere. Very easy to get too bright and garish, and it won't work then. Just got to be a little bit judicious with it. And all the time I'm keeping in my mind's eye what's going on up here with these droopy willows. Because actually, if I keep just adding to it while it's wet, there's a bit slightly stronger there, it won't get too overworked. Overworked is often when we've sort of put too many layers on a watercolour. I like pure watercolour, and I like to let some paper shine through. See the white page here? I'm using quite a nice thick paper, an Arche make. They make lovely paper. It's not the cheapest, but it'll never. It's a false economy for yourself to use cheap watercolour paper, because it never really works, and it doesn't allow you to make so many mistakes, which good paper does. So these hedges aren't quite out yet, really. These old hedges, they've still got a lot of sort of winter brown, and I'm going to add raw, well no, I'm not going to add burnt sienna. I'm going to add a bit of burnt sienna into the wet mix here, so that it looks like a hedge, hopefully, that's about to spring into action. So I'm letting my brush, still using the sort of medium-sized brush here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work up to making the gate dark against the green at the back. And there is a tree there which I've moved. As you can see, the tree is actually here, but that would just look silly to have a tree there, so I've moved it along, and it will come into its own when I do it later. I think I'm going to have to I may have to stop this painting after 10 minutes and do you a painting when I finish it, when it's dry, because I think this is going to be too wet to finish in 10 minutes. I'll just keep on swooping this green in, and just let a few other colours wash in. So I'm keeping the hedge a bit darker. I like letting the watercolour just do a little bit of its own thing, which certainly is there, as you can see. And here. That will dry much paler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop in 2 minutes and let it dry, and then we'll make another film of me coming in over the top of that dry paint later on. So you can just see how I've prepared the painting here. And I will come back later in the next 10 minutes and finish that painting once the underneath washes are bone dry. So see you in 2 ticks. Welcome back, everybody. We are back in the studio with my little painting of the gate, and where it's actually quite a lot warmer and easier to see what we're doing. So in this little clip of about 10 minutes, I am going to paint the little gate, probably the watering can and some of the hedge. And as you can see, I've done a little bit because I was just trying to establish the sort of swaying branches of the willow in the background, and I put a bit of the hedge here in just so you could see the tree. And the fact that trees are often not dark against light, but light against dark. Very often people make the mistake of making a sort of chocolate brown tree trunk, and it very rarely is, actually. So I'm just sort of trying to create interest in a small painting
And so I am going to load up my brush with a bit of, this is a very old gate. So I've got a lovely bit of gold green on my plate, which I like using. And I think the thing with watercolour is to infuse as much pigment as you possibly can. Keep it wet. When you make the mix, you must have enough paint and you must mix up enough before you start. There's nothing worse than having to rush off and mix another batch of colour when you're halfway through something. I'm also working from light to dark. So this may seem quite a strange colour to start with. But I'm starting with the sort of goldy green, which I may well paint almost immediately over. Now it helps if you know the object. I know it quite well, this gate. Painted it before. But it does have just that little bit of elusive perspective, which slightly goes to help the composition, because if you look at it, the top rung of the gate is nearly on my eye line, so it's pretty much parallel to my eye line where I'm standing. And all the lines below are just ever so slightly doing that, so that eventually those lines would meet in infinity, probably somewhere over here. So that's a funny colour for a gate, I can hear you say. So I am now going to just drop some raw umber on top of that. Just going to try and make it more interesting than brown. And some blue, which of course, the moment I put the blue on it, it's the moment that it'll become a more greeny sort of colour. It's got a nice bit of dark on there, but I can't do that yet while it's still wet. And again, I hope it dries before the end of this session, because I will be changing that colour slightly. And the gate post here, which is very much a light and a dark. So there's a light side here, and there is a dark side. Watercolour's all about light and dark, basically. So I'm just going to try and get that darker side of the gate post in there. So we just see a little bit against the background. And I'm just going to go straight on into the hedge, because it's quite nice to get that going. Again, a slightly green tinge to it, but not much. Just getting my colour right before I'm going to start with the palest colour I can see, which is the tops of these hedges are now a tiny bit green, but not very. It's been so cold. And they've still got their sort of winter plumage of sort of slightly browns. So just get a few of them in. Always remember to leave some gaps. Do you see how I'm leaving some of the undercoat to shine through? When you're doing hedges and trees, you always want to, as they say, leave room for the birds. Because otherwise, if you paint all of this over in some dark, dense colour, you won't make the same effect. Always darker at the bottom, where the sun don't shine. So here we go. Just going to get that line along the and behind the watering can. Now, your shapes in watercolour are entirely dependent on the things you do behind. So the shape of my watering can is going to depend very much on what I do to the hedge. So just letting my brush run around a bit here, just to find some. Stop short of the edge of the painting, which is what we always do. Just try to. I like the drips. If they make something interesting, I will let them drip. They don't always, but just occasionally they do. So that nice dark colour there is probably going to be. Just going to put it over here as well, just to show that it's the same. It's the same hedge. It's doing the same thing, doing the same job. And there's a lovely bit of shadow coming across from the hedge into the gateway here. Don't change colour, use the same one. Amazing how you can get away with using practically the same colour all the way through sometimes. So we may well come back now. If you've got too many drips, what you do is you just tip the page so that the paint will immediately run off in another direction. Just going to go for my smaller brush here And just pick out a few. Again, I'm going back into my burnt sienna mix and just let my brush play, because we can still see the winter undercarriage or skeleton bit here as well. What you do to one, you must do to the other. Trying to make this tree here show up by making the hedge behind a lot darker. So again, I'm not going to make a rigid straight line against the tree. You can really, although it's a straight tree, do you see how I've deviated and made little dinks and jinks to get the effect? It's all about making an effect, basically. And I'm coming back in again, ending up with my lovely pale green at the top, which again is just running back. I'm letting it all sort of run together, working as fast as I dare without making a complete mess of it, which could easily happen and frequently does. So I'm just sort of vaguely intoning a tree trunk over here. It's surprising how you can make up a landscape, actually. You really can. Now, I'm going to do the little red watering can. Ooh, not sure if I've got the right colour. So if Robert just wants to film the painting for a minute while I get my... which I have now got. The alizarin crimson, which I'm going to... There it is. And I'm just going to paint the little watering can, which was right over there and now seems to have disappeared for a reason I can't quite work out. Okay, so sometimes when you've got a big green painting, quite nice to put a bit of red in. So I'm going to start with the light side. And I'm just painting this little shape. And it's got a light and a dark. And if you want to make dark red, you just add the French ultramarine and it becomes a sort of purple. Just going to do the handle here, and then it sort of marries in the middle. Sometimes they marry with a bit of light, but I don't think this will. Trying to be accurate here. I'm leaving that bit of handle there. That may well run. I don't mind if it does, because sometimes it's nice not to be, doesn't all want to be, you know, too exact, but you want the rough idea. And it's casting quite a nice shadow on the grass, which I am going to do. Now, grass doesn't want to be, if you're doing a shadow on grass, it's the most difficult thing. And if anybody had a recipe for it, I would be a millionaire. If I had a recipe for it, I would be. Because artists have been struggling with shadows on grass forever. It's not dark grey. It's always a tone of the grass that you are. It's got to be a tone of the one you are using and not the tone of what you think you see. Just putting these daffodils, which are dying off at the back, putting them in. Surprising how you can make a feature of really something that's even not that important in the great scheme of things, but suddenly things come into their own. So back into the main thing of the gate, just to see if we can't give it a little bit of oomph before I finish. And what I might do is just send the picture of this, a photo of the finished painting, maybe with it, so that you can see. So do you see how there's a lovely dark side there? A light and a dark. And that's the real key with watercolour painting, any painting really. Figurative, certainly, painting. And that cross rung at the back is much, much darker. So I'm just going to get that in. Make sure it doesn't run there. There are certain areas, it's sort of controlled anarchy, I always think, watercolour. You've sort of got to be very controlled in some areas and loose and totally uncontrolled in others. So just kind of making this a bit controlled where this gate is. And then it's got a nice little lever, old-fashioned lever here. Ooh, bit wonky. Don't worry if it runs, because it will. There we go. I don't know how that goes, but I'm making it up. Amazing what you can get away with. Just going to drop in some dark on this gate post again. I haven't done much to the trees. I'm just going to do a little bit on the tree branch, just on the big one, the dark one, because that's sort of a little bit of impact here. Now, if you're drawing a branch, the last thing you want to do is hold it like tight like a barrow. You want to try very hard to hold your brush almost at the end, because you will get a slightly more daring line, a little bit loose and a bit mad, and that's fine, because it's quite nice to let your paintbrush or your pencil take you for a walk, and that's what it's going to do, I hope. I may have to soften it out in the end. It might be too hard. This is the last thing I will do on here, in front of the camera anyway. Again, this is a dark branch, a much darker branch coming towards us. So I'm just going to take a bit of water and run it along my line here, just doing, because it just makes it come and go a little bit, which is what you want it to do. You can always soften it out later, but it's not quite as easy. It's about the third time I've hit this tree trunk with a wash, and it still hasn't. Now, actually, if you look at the tree trunk, very often you've got these little. It goes around like that. So just occasionally you can bring the paintbrush around like that, and I'm going to feather it back in from the other way, so I'm coming that way now, and just making the line go around the tree, wrap the ribbon round. And just for a final fling before I stop, which is any minute now. Thank you for putting up with me. Just going to put a bit more green just in the front here. Now again, be careful not to do a great big slab, but just try if you can with your paintbrush. Do you see I'm letting it muck about a bit? Just making marks, and that will be probably as good as it gets. A little tiny observation in a garden. Just hopefully a little bit more green up here, and I might do some more to show you, but I'm just showing you how loose you can be, and I hope that has inspired some of you to do a bit of painting.